he just viewed me as a kid all the time. And up until the day I left, and I was 40-something years old when I left, he still viewed me as that kid who started there at 20. I did never, in his mind, ever graduate from that. You know, he doesn't care about, like, your progression in life. It's not his thing. It's just not what he does. So, yeah, I mean, you could sit there and observe and watch and do all that other stuff. That's great. But, yeah, no, if you wanted, if he would have had you be his assistant in that office forever, if it was up to him, he didn't care. Personal side, yes, I'd been there for 24 years. It's a long time. It's probably, I felt in my mind, I was not in a position that, you know, you should find this out on the air, and that's really how we're going to go out. But
hello, welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch, sponsored by Masses Restaurants in St. Louis. There's 5 locations. STLmasses.com is Mike Gange. Gange!
Hey, what's going on?
I told you not to use the tape, Gange. No freaking way! The rise of Gange through the Howard Stern network, because you were one of those kind of lifer guys. Like, you showed up kind of with Grillo and Stuttering John. I think Stuttering John was there before you got there. But just talk about how you ended up in the Howard Stern universe. It was an internship, right? Or is that...
Yeah. I started as an intern. I was 20 years old going into my junior year of college. And it's interesting because I knew of Howard, wasn't really a fan because I didn't really listen to talk radio at that point. You know, 20 years old, I was probably just listening to like some Headbangers music in my car whenever I was in it. So I wasn't really listening to that kind of entertainment. I was going to college at Long Island University, CW Post, and I worked at the radio station, the college radio station, with this kid, Mike Navarro, who was interning on the show. He was Stuttering John's best friend. He was also interning at Howard with John, and he was graduating and leaving his internship, and I knew I was going to need one, so I asked Mike if he can set me up with an interview. And that's really how it all started, from knowing Mike Navarro from going to college.
And back then, it seemed like at Howard, if you hung on and just kind of did a good job, you got a job, right? And that's pretty much what happened, right?
Yeah, that's basically what happens. If you're good at your job or good enough at your job, and you're willing to work for nothing, which I was, which I worked for a little over 2 years for free. So for zero money, nothing, zero. So if you're willing to work for that kind of pay, you can go far in this industry. So I was able to, stay there. I showed up every morning because the biggest problem was prior to when I joined the show is they would get interns and you'd have to be in at 5 a.m. And for any, college age kid, being somewhere at 5 a.m. 5 days a week, was not easy, and most interns didn't last. And so they really, I came in, was there every day at 5 a.m., did my job, did whatever I was asked to do, stayed until, 1, 2 o'clock, and then would go to college after that. But yeah, that was really, if you could just show up and be on time, that was considered the best you can do.
That's good. So what were you doing as an intern for that many hours for free?
It was a little bit of everything. So you were intern responsibilities at the time were logging the radio show, answering phone callers, because obviously the show was interactive with phone callers, and you'd have to help screen the callers. It was getting Howard's food, getting Robin's food. Really, doing any of the grunt work, cleaning out the little mini fridge that was in the office. The show at the time was recorded on cassette tapes, and every 45 minutes, somebody would have to flip the cassette tape to get the record, which was always funny. Again, looking back on old school technology, there would always be 30 seconds or so of every show every 45 minutes that's lost because you'd have to flip the cassette tape. And then you'd have to, so those were all part of intern responsibilities, was flipping the cassette tape and making sure the whole show got recorded. I'm trying to think of any other kind of really good ones. Running a lot of errands, getting Howard's paper, being Robin's news intern for a while, and so meant, going through the newspapers and looking for interesting stories for her, cleaning up her office, getting her coffee, those kind of, interesting jobs that an intern has.
So I'm guessing then, so the E! Show comes around in 94, and this is sort of your big break to sort of get a job, right? Because now there's a whole TV component to this that it wasn't there before. We need people. Is that basically how you start getting paid?
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you a little bit of more of a backstory. So I was also, after I started getting paid, after I graduated college and I started getting paid from the radio show, minimum wage, I was also, Howard offered me an opportunity to kind of work at his house and be one of his personal assistants. He had a main personal assistant, but she needed help, doing things. So she was there by herself.
You're doing gardening and the pool and the stuff, right?
Yeah, basically carrying stuff, moving, furniture from here to there. So that was my kind of second job of the day. I would leave the radio show and go to his house and kind of help his assistant for the day. And Howard had gotten a show on E! Prior to the one that everybody knows now, right? The radio show. This was a one-on-one interview show. So working at his house, I wound up being in a lucky position where I would answer the phone for his office. And, all the executives at E! Would call every day, for the launch of that first show constantly, right? The president of the network was calling. There was always somebody calling. So I was answering the phone and getting to know these people as I was answering the phone. And I would, Fran Shea, who was like the head of the E! Network, she wasn't the president at the time, but I think she was the head of the entertainment division and I would every day, say something like, "Hey, Fran, when are you guys going to hire me?" You know what I mean? Like, "Hey, I'd really love to work on the TV show." And so it kind of like when Howard, and that show kind of was shot in New York and a little bit in LA and all around. So there was really no opportunity there. But when they made that secondary deal in order to do the radio show on TV, I was in a good position to say, "Hey, this is something I really want to do. This is what I want my next step to be. Can we make this happen?" And, the people, at E! Were really good with that. And Howard was semi-okay with letting that happen.
What's it like being at his house all the time? Is he around? Do you have to deal with him? Or is it more you're in some sort of basement? Because I know we're going to get to a story where you had an unfortunate incident with a Seinfeld tape, I think it was.
Yeah. So, he was around. He was around all day long. He said he was in his office all day, and we were in an office next to his office. So, not like I would see him constantly. He was in his office for pretty much the whole time we'd be there. But we'd have to duck in and out of his office and ask him things, and he'd pop into ours occasionally. But for the most part, he was there and around.
What was your relationship like with him at this? Was he good to work for? Was it like mentor mentee? What did you consider this kind of in that early? No. There's no mentor mentee. Well, he told you your voice was terrible. You'll never be on the radio. So I know he didn't think of you as a mentee.
Yeah.
Let's go.
There was. It's interesting. I don't know. There's no real good way to say it, right? You're in a great position where you're learning from somebody who's like the master, the greatest of all time at what he does. But he does not take much, he doesn't care about like your progression in life. It's not his thing. It's just not what he does. You could sit there and observe and watch and do all that other stuff. That's great. But yeah, no, if he would have had you be his assistant in that office forever if it was up to him. He didn't care.
Well, so let me add, and I'm not trying to be stupid, but like you could have been Ralph, right? Like, because Ralph just was his stylist and then somehow becomes his best friend. I don't even know if you want to be his best friend, but I don't understand the Ralph thing with him.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't either. No, I don't think I could. Like, I was still young enough where he just viewed me as a kid all the time. And up until the day I left, and I was 40-something years old when I left, he still viewed me as that kid who started there at 20. I did never, in his mind, ever graduate from that. Which is, look, that's how sometimes that happens a lot of times. I still think of my little nephews and my little cousins and stuff as little kids, and they're grown-ups. And you and that happens. And then I really think at the end of the day, he always, no matter what responsibility I had or what job I did or where I landed in that, I think he still thought I was, this 20-year-old kid who was his intern.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because I was just, as I was thinking about this interview, it's like, well, you were there a long time, and you were one of the, I mean, you think of Gary and Fred and Robin, and then I go Stuttering John, Casey. Well, they went, Artie left, and you were there from start, from what I remember, and it's like, so where was this, where's this relationship? But that the kid thing makes sense. Like, if Grillo would have stayed on, it would have probably been the same thing. Like, Grillo's just a potato head or whatever.
Exactly. It's an interesting scenario when you're kind of caught in that, right? It's like you want to do more and you want to kind of graduate to the next steps, but he's never really going to see you as that. He'd be more apt to see somebody from the outside who was coming in as an executive producer than somebody who was homegrown into an executive producer, in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, even Gary, part of the reason Gary still gets shit to this day is, because he still thinks of Gary as Boy Gary, so that's really, what his mindset is.
No, that's a really good analogy. I mean, Gary's 60 now, and he's still Baba Boo.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
got
kids that are bigger than Howard,
Yeah. And the other thing is, we're all there to be, comic foils to him. We're little props that he can go to when he needs to do something funny, and look, as part of being the show, you kind of get that to a degree. And you realize what your role is, right? And you realize that that's part of, appearing on this kind of show, is that, we're all here. I mean, it's a comedy show at the end of the day. So we all have good senses of humor, and we all feel like, we're all in on the joke. But we're really there to be his, comic foil.
Yeah, and I became a fan of this show, I think, in the mid-'90s. The Channel 9 show was shown here the Channel 9 show showed at 3 in the morning here in St. Louis on Channel 11, and this is back when you had to record things on VCR, and my brother and I were like, what? We knew of him, from the Letterman, but the fact that he had this show, and he was, the playing his own tapes, and everything was just so crazy about this show.
That was a great show. I actually was lucky enough to, I would go, they would tape on, I think they taped on Friday nights from what I remember. So I would sometimes get to go and watch the taping. Luckily I think I appeared on one episode or two episodes, just kind of in the background or something. But yeah, that was an incredible show. It really was. It really sad that it kind of never really got its full due, and also sad that it never really saw the light of day until people started ripping it and putting it on YouTube now,
Well, and that's the thing. It was it was just sort of grungy, and like I said, he would stop the tape in the middle, and you could see the stopping of the tape, and you could hear Jackie laughing in the background, and just the set was, and I liked that it was sort of localized. I don't know, but I became a fan, and that's when I knew of you because of these classic moments. So I mentioned this tape. I think that's the big first thing that happened to you, right? Tell me a little bit about, so what, you were supposed to tape something?
There were many, many big things that happened before that. That wasn't necessarily the biggest thing.
I think most memorable, maybe?
Is this probably one of the most memorable, because he also put it in the book. He retold that story in the book.
And would you
I think that really, at the end of the day, kind of cemented that story.
In case people don't know what we're talking about.
So the story was, which version do you want? Do you want the version that he told on the air? Do you want the version that he told on the air, or do you want the truth? Because they're not the same.
Go both.
But I'll tell you his story. So his story was, he had his daughter's teacher was dying in the hospital, and all she ever wanted was to watch Seinfeld to help cheer her up. And this is, pre-DVD days when you couldn't just buy DVDs or download or stream. And Ralph owned a VHS compilation that was taped off of the air of every Seinfeld episode. And, he asked me to make a copy of it, and they were going to send it to the teacher in the hospital to cheer her up. And lo and behold, she goes to put this tape in, and it's a porn tape. It's, it's a enema tape or whatever. I forget, a Japanese enema tape or whatever he referred to it as. And, obviously he was very embarrassed, and it was a whole big thing, and he had usually apologized and blah, 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 blah. So that's the legendary story of the Seinfeld tape.
Oh, that's just to hear you set it up and tell it. It's really, to hear it from the person that, how did that happen? So you're blaming Ralph? Are we blaming Ralph?
No, here's exactly what the story. Here's how it happened. In a play-by-play. I was handed both tapes towards the end of the day, and you got to remember this was like a 6-hour VHS dub, so it was one of those things that I would set up to record before I left for the night, and the next morning you'd come in and you'd deal with it then, because to sit around, I wasn't going to run a dub for 6 hours because I wasn't there that long. So I set up a dub. I was handed both tapes. I was handed the Seinfeld tape and the supposed blank tape. Now, the supposed blank tape is dub stock. So why, if this was so important, would somebody give me dub stock of a porn, right? You'd make it a brand new tape so you wouldn't have any issues. So my bad was that I forgot, and you're a little bit older, so maybe you'd remember this. You used to have to put, because the tab was pulled. So you used to have to put a piece of tape over that tab so it would record. So my bad was I don't think I ever either put the tape on it or I never really hit the record button properly that the record started. But I think it was more the tape, because I remember seeing the tape playing and assuming that it was dubbing. So the next morning, I get a call from Howard's assistant asking if the dub is done. And I was at the show at that time. I didn't get back to his office until mid-afternoon. And I was like, I assume so. I set it to record. And she's like, okay, great. So she popped it out and then mailed it out. So there was no opportunity for me to check the work because I wasn't there to see that it didn't record. So really, I had a portion of that, but it wasn't all on me. So that's the story. It's not as funny when you're listening to it that way than when it's all my fault and I screwed up.
There is a reason why he's the king of all media. He did tell that story much better than
yeah, exactly. Like when you look at the truth isn't as funny as the version that's super embellished.
It's still great. It's still a great story. So we talked about the original E! Show where he was doing those interviews, and then E! comes in and they put the cameras in. So this is where you kind of get a break, right? Like you start running. Yeah. Is it basically, was your job to run the camera and get the interviews, or what all you doing?
Yeah. So it was I was really a production assistant on the show. That was like my title. But part of that was, we wanted to capture all the behind the scenes hijinks and, to kind of work it into the show. So obviously they weren't going to hire a cameraman. I'm there. We had this high 8 camera, and I would just kind of lurk around and, tape anything interesting that was kind of going on. But part of that was, and it kind of worked into this, because our executive producer at the time would kind of start doing this a little bit, where we'd get a pre-interview from the guest about what they were kind of expecting for the day. And then we kind of get like this post-interview about how the interview went, which came the famous thing, like how'd it go in there.
Were you happy or sad?
Yeah. Listen, I was 22 years old. I mean, I wasn't like really experienced in interviewing people, and some of the guests made me nervous, of course. When you'd be sitting there waiting for like Roseanne to come out, and she starts yelling at you the second you start asking a question, you kind of get nervous at 22. Yeah. These were big celebrities, and I was a kid. So part of that was doing these pre-interviews and post-interviews where it was my job to really just ask all these stupid questions, which weren't even like, Howard was always like, oh, you're not original, you don't ask original questions. But at the end of the day, who are you going to listen to do original questions to? Me or Howard, right? This was just a quick post reaction of their interview. It wasn't meant to be like funny. It wasn't meant to be, Howard's the star and he's asking all the questions. This was just literally a how to go in there kind of. all that would get in the show was like that 10, 15 seconds at the end. So it wasn't like there was like, I could, do a whole long interview with them.
Who was your favorite celebrity? There are three favorite celebrities that you asked. How did
Well, all right. I mean, there's favorite celebrities. It's kind of a hard one. I mean, there were so many. Most of them, I would say 95% were really great, happy to be there, like really just kind of like enjoyed. I mean, I would always say from the time period, Pam Anderson was number one. Just, at the time she was just, our Marilyn Monroe or whatever, and just every time she would come in, just the feeling in the hallway would just be like, so electric with just her being around. Like some of the bands that were always there. I mean, I was a huge, I still am a huge music lover. Matter of fact, big props, Eddie Van Halen. When Van Halen came on, that was awesome. David Lee Roth. Matter of fact, there was always, the show had a very strict edict about not getting autographs. You couldn't, if as somebody who worked there, you would never want to ask, a guest for an autograph. It's kind of improper. It kind of puts them on the spot. But the one and only guest that I ever got an autograph from, which went through the chain, I asked Gary, and I guess Gary might have cleared it with Howard or whoever, but was David Lee Roth. And I guess his manager had gotten me a signed, 8x10, like that was really, so those kind of guests were always like my favorite. I mean, outside of like, Beetlejuice, he's still the overall number one, because him walking around the halls was the most entertaining thing you can ever imagine.
I was gonna say, is he the number one whack packer? Is he
100%,
the king of whack?
100%.
Yeah, right. I mean,
there's nobody. At the time, maybe Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf was up there, but Beetlejuice is the king. He's the ruler of that whack pack world.
I mean, and you get to see this like we talked about, when you got there, he's in 3 cities, then he gets to 20, then 50, then he's going to Sirius. I know we're kind of fast forwarding real fast, but I mean, what was that, just being around that, like seeing it? And did you enjoy it more when it was a little more condensed and more kind of family, right?
Well, yeah, it was definitely, it's kind of a hard answer. There was 2 separate versions, right? The Sirius show was kind of different, but it was still great because it was this whole new world and everybody was excited and had all these like great things about all these possible things we can do. The organization was kind of getting bigger, so we can kind of do some more. But yeah, those early days were just really like so much more fun. It was, like you got to remember, I was there for all 3. When we started, we were in New York, Washington, and Philly, right? Huge markets. I was there for all of those funerals, the John DeBella funerals and all of those things. Then we went to Los Angeles, and that was huge. Then I was there for, the e-shows, the books, and then the movie, him shooting the movie. All like super crazy times, just unbelievable experience to kind of be there through that rise and really see, like where we started or where I started on the show to where we finally ended up.
Do you have any favorite stories from that little period? Did you go to the movie set at all? Did you get to be part of that at all? Or
I went to the movie set to, we were doing for Howard's E! Show, we were doing behind the scenes of the movie special. So we shot a lot of the behind the scenes of the movie. So I got to go on a couple like sets that were like local. Some of them were like far into Queens or outside of, like the New York City region. So any of the ones in the New York City region, I was able to go to. So the big famous one is the scene in Bryant Park where they kind of hold a rally. So I was there, shooting for the E! Show, not myself, but we had a camera crew and we were shooting that. So somewhere in that mass of people is me and a camera crew, Well,
I'll look for you. Let's see if we can circle you.
Wait, hold on. Hold on. You froze for a second. Sorry.
You froze, but I heard you, so it was okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I think
all right. Good.
We were talking about the eras because, like, in my head, I think he showed up in St. Louis around '98, but I had already seen these shows, so I was trying to follow him however I could. But it's the Jackie era, the Artie era, and then the after Artie era. Do you have a favorite between Jackie and Artie eras?
No, I mean they were both totally different, right? So the Jackie era was just, I mean, it was more, it was just because it was a smaller crew. And Jackie was more of a writer. He wasn't necessarily like, he was a personality on the show, but that wasn't his primary job. His primary job was to be a writer. I can't say that I like one over the other. I mean, I loved and love Artie. He was one of the funniest parts of the show for the many years that he was there. There was nothing that dude wouldn't say or do, and that's why you love him. And I don't think I can say which one I like better. They're both equal to me.
I love Jackie.
And both different.
Yes.
Both different.
I love the Artie era, I have to say. I just remember when people talk about sitting in their cars waiting for a commercial, I literally was doing that a few times at work because I couldn't wait to hear. He was so funny. I always ask my guests, do you talk to Artie? Do we know where he is? How is he doing? Do you keep in touch with him?
I haven't I saw him in February, I think, right before this COVID lockdown started. So I haven't seen him since or heard from him since. So I don't know how he's doing. But, I mean, I saw him perform one night, and he was great, and I got to see him for a couple of minutes. He was trying to, like, get out of there really quick. I think he just, he no longer, like, hangs around and does that. So the minute the show was over, he was, like, hitting the road. So I got to see him for, like, 2 minutes and tell him I loved him and, give him a big hug, and that was really it. So I haven't seen him, but that was, like, literally February before COVID started.
Did you go on any shoots during his Artie days where he was selling out shows and being kind of a rock and roll star?
Yeah, we did a big shoot in Vegas that we called Artie's Party, and Artie had just sold out 2 nights at the Joint in the Hard Rock, so we wanted to kind of go and tape a little of that, but we knew Artie was going to be out there, so we were like, why don't we make this like pool party special where Artie would kind of like host something at the pool, and I think it wound up being like, obviously like some sort of like bikini contest kind of thing at the Hard Rock pool, and Artie and Ronnie hosted it. So it was a fun time. I mean, just Artie's crazy. I mean, it was always fun to be around him and those kind of things. And Vegas is his element. And I remember, like this is how cool Artie is, and just in general, and why I love him and I'll always love him. And it's not all about the money, but like while we were there, we were all out, to do this thing, and Artie had sold out these 2 nights at the Joint, and he was really like happy in a good mood. And we all went out to dinner at Nobu, and there was probably, I don't know, 15 of us, maybe 20, and Artie paid for everything for the crew and for everybody. Just, it was probably a, $15,000 or $20,000 dinner, and that's how awesome Artie is.
Won a bet, paid for dinner, lost the bet the next night, but
oh yeah, 100%. He probably blew. I don't know how much he made that weekend, but he probably blew all that money. He probably left like in the red.
I was talking. So Brian Phelan, a coworker of yours, was nice enough to join and talk, and had great stories. And Brian's awesome. But what I started thinking about too is like, okay, you guys have this radio show that it's on from 6 a.m. to 10 or whatever. But you guys go on these shoots, and like it's a totally different. It's not the radio. It's a whole different thing, and it's so cool. These stories. Do you have a favorite out of radio shoot that you go on? That there are 1 or 2 that pop up in your mind when you go, holy shit, that was fun. I mean, Playboy Mansion, of course. I mean,
I mean, that was like the bigger. You're talking about the smaller little shoots that you do. I mean, it's tough because there's so many, right? So, I mean, I'll give you a couple real quick. So, I was Ronnie's main producer because Ronnie was one and still is one of my best friends. So I would go pretty much.
Why are you guys? I'm just kidding.
Why? I love Ronnie. Ronnie is one of my favorites.
I'm sure the character is not the same. If the character is, you would love Ronnie no matter what.
The character is similar, but not that. I mean, I'll give you a great little tidbit. For the first, I think, 2 years of me working on that show, every morning I would have to greet Howard's limo and get him into the building. And every morning I would go down there and I'd say, "Hey, Ronnie, how you doing?" And he would just say, "Fuck you." That's all he said for like 2 years. Like, I didn't get anything else out of him except that for like 2 years.
He's shrinking too, right? Is he getting smaller? Is he?
Yeah, he's definitely getting smaller. Yeah, I mean, he was tiny to begin with. He's like, he's elf-like at this point.
I'm
he's
sorry,
like,
I jumped all over a story though. That's my bad.
So I went on a lot of Ronnie shoots, so we had some really good times. The famous like whoa 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 stop the clock. That was one of the ones I was on, which was really funny. We did one where Ronnie was going around doing like definitions for girls, where he'd kind of like give every girl these like crude, weird definitions, and he'd call them all like by weird names. But those were all great. But I'd probably say there was really like two highlights. The first being Hank the Angry Dwarf was supposed to accept a radio award for Howard. I think it could have been like the Billboard Award, the Billboard Radio Award, which was like a big industry radio award. And we were going to send Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf to accept. So Doug and I go on the shoot, and it's in Orlando, Florida, and Hank is coming out of Boston, and he's going to meet us, and we're waiting in the airport for him to arrive. Lo and behold, he never arrives. We have no idea where he is. This is like, it's kind of at the era where I think like I don't even know if we had cell phones yet. Like this was kind of, I think we were still might have been using payphones. So trying to find him was like nearly impossible. Doug and I wait at the airport for hours. Finally, we get a hold of somebody who worked at the airline that had talked to him and figured out they wouldn't let him on the flight because he was too intoxicated. So he couldn't get down there. So like literally like we were trying to figure out, like I stayed up all night long trying to get him on another flight for the next morning to see if he'd get in on time. And it was just such a headache, and we finally we just couldn't get him down there. So I think like our second bet was like, I think we found like a local stripper to accept the award for him, but like because Hank was too drunk to get on the plane.
I'm going to get an award for Howard.
Yeah. And then the other like number one was going to Las Vegas with Beetlejuice. Howard was I think the AVN Awards was giving an award to Howard. This is the Adult Video News Awards. And they were giving an award to Howard, and we were sending Beetlejuice to accept, and the award, they knew he was coming, and so we were out in Vegas with Beetlejuice. But we kind of had a script prepared for him to read, and Beetlejuice can't remember a script. He can't remember like word to word to word. So we had given him an earpiece that we were just going to kind of like, off stage, whisper in his ear. And then he would just repeat. We kind of like would practice it. We practiced it the whole like day before, but he couldn't hear out of the earpiece. It wasn't loud enough. So we had to get him like full on giant headphones for him to hear. And he went up on stage. Meanwhile, every word we said, any of them anyway, it didn't even matter. Every word we said, you didn't understand, but it was the greatest acceptance speech known to man.
Yeah, I mean,
if you ever get a chance, you should find it.
Yeah, and when I first saw Beetlejuice, I thought that was an act, and then I was like, this is great. I mean,
dude, I'm still convinced that one day he's going to like just be like, hey guys, I've been screwing with you all these years. I'm really normal. Like, and all of a sudden, he's going to have us punked for all these years. Because every once in a while, he will say something that's so dead on and correct. So it's like, where did that come from? Like, where did that side of Beetlejuice come from? That's the one I want to know. Did he just slip out of character for a second? I'm waiting for that day when he says, hey, I've been screwing with you this whole entire time.
I hope he knows how he transcends, because, I mean, there's probably 60-year-olds that go out going, R-E-D, red! And I got a 12-year-old in this house who's got him as a screensaver. Like, they love him.
It's so funny that you said that, because so many people have been coming up to me recently that have teenage kids, and he's become a huge thing on the internet. They've all come up to me recently and said that their kids love Beetlejuice. And I'm like, well, how old is your kid? And they're like 12, 13. And I've probably said half a dozen, if not more, people have told that to me recently.
Yeah, he's huge.
Crazy.
Huge.
Yeah,
huge.
It's awesome. Good for him. He's huge in the internet world. I love Beat. I really do.
So how did it change when you went from E to Sirius? So you got a promotion, right? So you're not really running the camera anymore. Now you're sort of helping Doug be his right-hand man, right? Basically, and that's
yeah. Yeah, so when we left the E! Show, I was the supervising producer of that show. But going over to Howard TV and In Demand was a much bigger job because we were not only just doing a nightly show on E! Now we were having our own kind of like on-demand channel with, 40 hours plus of programming, or 40 hours, of programming a month, which is a lot more content to kind of like fill that. And, when the channel was, when they kind of came up with the idea for this channel, it was going to be, a mixture of, new radio stuff, the old E! Show uncensored now, because now we can go back and uncensor everything, and new content, any new piece of content we wanted to do, we could put it on.
It was the greatest idea. We couldn't get it here in St. Louis. I was like, come on, let's get this, because this is the greatest. I mean, 40 hours, Howard all day, all night. I mean, it was just great.
That's crazy. How come you guys couldn't get it? What cable company were you?
Yeah, Charter or Spectrum or whatever.
Oh, I think we were on Charter. Come on. I feel like we were on Charter.
We could not get it here. It sucked.
Well, that's a bummer.
Yeah. So Doug has told the story here, but just, do you even see that final day coming? Like, I mean, Doug,
no. Well,
but on the air, you hear that you're not going to work there anymore, right? So tell me how that day goes for you. Just, you just almost said, well, maybe I did, but tell me just a little bit about those final days, the final kind of months.
So I mean, it's pretty simple, right? We knew the contract was up. We knew it was being negotiated. We knew that they were shopping the show to other people too. We didn't know, obviously the contract was going to end at a specific date. So we didn't know anything outside of, hey, everybody's negotiating. And we were under the impression that, the negotiations were going somewhat okay and things were going to kind of all work out. And then we hear the news on the air. So that was really how we found out that the channel wasn't coming back.
I mean, what
Howard's announcement.
And what did you feel? Like, you've been there so long. Did you feel like you'd be alive there? Or like, how does that make you feel? Because I'm like, and Doug's been there a long time too, and he's an executive, and like, I know when you lose, like, things don't go right, it's weird. But boy, when you're there that long and you're that loyal, and it just is sort of done dirty. Like, tell me what did it feel like to you? Like,
look, I have a different way of looking at it than probably most people. It was business on why the show didn't come back, right? And contracts, they come and they go, and sometimes they're not always done. But on the other side, on the personal side, yes, I've been there for 24 years. It's a long time. It's probably, I felt in my mind, I was not in a position that, you should find this out on the air, and that's really how we're going to go out. But there was still always the chance the video portion of the show was still going to stick around in some version. So it wasn't really like, hey, you're done, until they finally were like, yeah, I guess, no deals are being made, But yeah, it was really odd to hear it. It was really sad. It was sad for everybody that worked on the Howard TV team, because they, again, everybody really cared about this product and cared about working on the show. And I think everybody just got deflated hearing that's the way the show was going to go out, and not getting, even a personal heads up an hour before, 15 minutes before anything, that, you're hearing this news on the radio, and, it does hurt that way. It does sting.
Did you have a chance ever to talk to Howard about it?
No, we had very limited, I was there until the end of that year. Some people didn't last as long because, once the show was deemed that it wasn't coming back, the company had like a layoff plan in place, where certain employees we were going to purge as we were going closer to the end of the contract date, where, obviously we weren't going to be producing new content. So I was there, I think myself, Doug, and one other person were there to the very bitter end. But yeah, no, I mean, there was a few little interactions, but nothing really. Nothing to speak of.
Do you go, what the fuck?
Dude, I can't, this is how I've always looked at it. I can't control how somebody else reacts to things. You know what I mean? Like, and I can't put my expectations on somebody else because they're not me, and everybody acts the way they're going to act, and they're never going to change just for me. So I took it as this is the way he is, and this is the way he acts, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, early on when you're talking about getting, that kid thing, I mean, you could see him just, well, he's a kid, yeah. He's an intern. I don't need him, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, Howard doesn't need anybody except himself, really, right? The show still, it's his name, it's his show. If everybody else disappeared, he'd still be doing a show and be all by himself and just be fine. But I think we did all bring something to that show. I don't think that we didn't have anything to do with its success. I think he would have been successful no matter what, but I do think that there were certain things that people loved about us being on the show that I think, we brought some value to that.
And he gave you a lot of shit on the air. Did you enjoy that when you got called in there?
Depends. Sometimes, absolutely. Listen, you make your own bed, right? Sometimes you do something and it's going to be on the air. Sometimes you manufacture something because it's going to get on the air. And sometimes, you fuck up and all of a sudden you're like, oh, man, I'm never going to hear the end of it. And those are the times you really don't want to be on. But like we always had a pretty good phrase that we said, the pendulum swings quick around here, and the job was to push it onto somebody else. So you would always keep a little something in your back pocket on somebody else that when it started pointing in your direction, you just drop that little grenade and hopefully it goes and hits somebody else. And that somebody else was usually always Gary. So, it was a great way to get the attention of you if you didn't want it that day.
Yeah. You could probably pass it off to Brandano, right? You had a good fight with him on the air. That was a good one, right?
Yeah. We had a little disagreement at that point. I like Steve though. I have, we
I don't like you, Gange. I don't like you.
I know. Listen, sometimes in the heat of the moment, a lot of things happen. Where your ego gets in the way, or you just you're pretty aggressive. But yeah, it was a good fight. That was a good fight. It almost turned personal the day before, or the couple days before, whenever it started. It almost turned to actual fisticuffs.
Well, you would have kicked.
We were almost going to throw down.
Right, you'd kick his ass, right? Let's just get to the bottom of that.
I mean, I love Steve, and I'm not looking to fight him, and it's I do weigh 100 pounds more than him, so.
Well, and then I don't know how much people know about this MARCI person, but she came in and sort of changed the way Howard thought. Did it have anything to do with Howard TV, or did that kind of that stuff stay?
I don't know. I mean, she kind of came around that kind of tail end. So we didn't have a terrible amount of dealings with her. We were kind of our own operation. So maybe that was why things didn't work out. Because we were kind of independent and our own operation, and we worked for a separate company. So that separate company had a lot of say in things, at least as far as what we could do and, how we were treated. But yeah, I don't know. I can't say for sure.
Yeah. Well, I've had a great time kind of reliving this stuff, and you're at FUBU now, and that's, I think people know about FUBU.
Yeah. Check it. It's not FUBU. It's not the clothing. I'm not stitching clothes.
90s,
in the 90s.
Urban shorts.
Yeah. It's FuboSportsNetwork.com. Fubo. F-U-B-O.
I was trying to say, for some reason, I could not get the Fubo.
Yeah.
That's a streaming service, so people can get the streaming service right now, and that's cool. So
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, and if you love soccer and you like to laugh, the Cooligans are one of the best shows around. They're so funny and so great, and Drinks with Binks is just a really, really good interview show. So please check them out. FuboSports.com, FuboSportsNetwork.com, sorry, FuboSportsNetwork.com.
If you go to FuboSports.com, you're going to find some...
And you'll see...
Get some bad shorts.
Exactly. You'll see something else, and you'll see the stuff that we're working on now. So
I'm sure people want to know. Have you talked to Kendra? How's the lady situation? People ask. I'm sure.
I mean, lady situation is great. I have a long-term girlfriend who's amazing, and things are good.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, you were going to say something. I don't want to.
No. I didn't know where you were going.
No, I have nothing else. That was the end of my list. I didn't even really.
Nice.
I could ask about Kendrick.
What else did you have? Yeah, that's kind of long. That's really. I'm not.
People already. You've talked about that enough.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all. I mean, we went through all the good stuff. I thought we did it a little longer than I expected, but.
Dude, that's some research on a little piece of loose leaf there.
That's what I do.
I was hoping I'd at least get something typed up.
No, this is the way. Now you're in sports production, and I've been in sports production all my life, and like people try to get you to, hey, can you give me this, in Google Docs, and I'm like, can't I just give you? This is my notes. This is what I kept. So,
Google Docs, Slack, Asana, get used to it.
I know.
All these stupid products that everybody has to use.
It's taken over. Well, thank you, Mike Gange, and thank you for watching again here on Here's the Pitch. Masses Restaurants, the sponsor, title sponsor, stlmasses.com. Go to the website, check out the directions to the restaurant and the menus and all the good stuff there, and we'll see you next time.